The first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are what we call the Torah, the books of the law, what the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, basically hold their hats on, or in this case, their yarmulkes. Side note, I do own a yarmulke. That's a Grateful Dead yarmulke. I was asked, why would you buy a Grateful Dead yarmulke? My response is, when you're in Jerusalem and you find a Grateful Dead yarmulke, you just simply can't leave it sit there. You have to buy it. So I own a Grateful Dead yarmulke. Anywho, that's beside the point. That was just free information to show how dumb I am. The 5th book, Deuteronomy, the last book of the Torah. It is Moses' magnum opus, his last hurrah, his last instructions to the people of Israel as their leader. He's already been told that he's going to die, he's not going to enter into the promised land, and Joshua's going to take over. Now the people don't know this, but this is the way it is. So Moses opens up the book of Deuteronomy giving speeches. 3 separate sermons. We'll call them sermons. Pep talks, instructions, that last game speech that a coach gives before the people go out, to get them motivated, to get them turning in the right direction, to get them going. The first 28, 29 chapters is basically Moses giving a history lesson. He's telling them where they came from, where they're going to go, the lands that they're going to see, the people they're going to encounter, what God has promised them. He reminds them of the covenant that they've shared with God, that they are his people, and he will watch over them and give them the promised land. He reviews the commandments that he gave them, the 10 commandments that came down off Mount Sinai, the other commandments and laws that we were received in Leviticus and Numbers. He reminds them that they have an obligation, that a covenant is a two-way street. It's not just God saying, I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to give you all this stuff. It demands a response from them, a change in their lives to follow what God has planned for them. A covenant is a binding agreement between 2 people, God and his children. And Moses reminds them of that throughout the first 28 chapters of Deuteronomy. Now, it's in these first few chapters that I think we find the key verses of Deuteronomy that really sum it all up, that tell us what's in there and what it's all about. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9, read like this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Then over a few chapters in chapter 10, verses 12 through 15, he says this. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord, which I'm commanding you today for your good. I think it's in those 2 passages that really sums up that first sermon that Moses gives, that first part of his final speech. He's letting them know that they have an obligation to follow God's commands, to bind them on their heart, to write them on their wrists, to put them on their doorposts, to put them everywhere they go, to live it out. He's saying there's more to being God's child than just saying, I'm God's child. People know I'm a Cardinals fan because I eat, sleep, and breathe Cardinal baseball. I'll talk to you about it. I'll wear the clothes. I went to breakfast this morning. What's the first thing I heard? What do you think about the trade? Because people know that's what I know and that's what I love and I want to talk about it. two things, God and baseball. Those are my two go-tos. Moses is saying that's the way you need to be. He's telling the Israelites, that's how you have to live your life. That's how you have to act. That you have to have the Word of God, the laws, the commands, His everything written on you. That when people see you, they see Him. And He tells them, don't stray from Him. To remain faithful to Him. Remain faithful to the covenant that you've made with Him. Otherwise, there's no covenant. Now, the second part of Moses' sermon is very simple. And it's the overall theme of the book of Deuteronomy. Moses' last words to his people. Choices. Chapter 29, chapter 30 of Deuteronomy tell us very simply, you have a choice. It's your decision. Your parents, your grandparents, your neighbors, your best friend, they can't make the choice for you. They can't make you decide what to do with your life and how you want to live. They can encourage you. They can show you the ways to go, but it is your call. It's your choice of how you live. Later, and we'll talk about this next week, Joshua lays down the gauntlet and says, choose for yourself this day whom you shall serve. That's basically what Moses is saying in that second part of his message to the people, the second sermon. He's saying, choose today what you're going to do. And if we go back to Deuteronomy chapter 11, he tells them, when you enter the land of Jordan, when you enter the promised land, the land of Canaan, the promised land that God's given to you, half of you go up on one mountain, half of you go up on the other mountain. And when you get up there, the first group on one mountain, shout out all the praises of God. Shout out all the decrees, all the blessings, all the great things God is going to do for you. Shout out all the laws. And on the other mountain, shout out all the punishments. All the things that are going to go wrong if you don't follow God's land. If you don't follow His rules. If you enter this land and you take false gods. If you dishonor your father and mother. If you don't accept the blessings of God. Shout out all that's going to go wrong. And what he's doing there is he's telling people when you get there, you're going to have two choices. You follow God. You give Him your whole heart. Or you don't follow God. You keep your heart to yourself. In essence, what he's saying is, choose to either accept the covenant or to accept damnation. He puts it pretty bluntly. And then the last part, the third sermon that Moses gives, is his farewell speech. The last couple of chapters of Deuteronomy include Moses' death. But he tells the people, I'm leaving. I'm out. My time on earth is done. Joshua's taken over. You remember Joshua, one of the two spies that didn't turn back from God, that said God is good and He's going to protect us. Joshua's taken over. He's going to be your leader. You listen to him. You do what he says. Follow his guidance because he's God's chosen person for this role. And then it tells us that Moses is taken up to view the promised land. He wasn't allowed to enter because of the punishments that were brought upon him. But he could see it. And then Moses dies. And that's the end of Deuteronomy. It's a very simple book, but it's very complex. That may sound like an oxymoron, but it's not. Following Christ is the simplest thing we can do. Giving your life to Him, honoring Him, living your life for God is the most gratifying thing that we can do. And it's not tough. All He asks for is our heart. To show Him the same love that He's shown us. That's the whole purpose of Deuteronomy, and that's the whole purpose of the Bible. To show us that God has given us so much in our lives. And all I ask in return is for us to honor Him. To live holy, like we talked about in Leviticus a couple weeks ago. To live holy lives, to follow His decrees, to follow His laws, to accept the blood of Christ as our Passover lamb. Now let's go back to that key verse in Deuteronomy chapter 6. You know, the one that says, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Oddly enough, Jesus talks about that too. You know, Jesus, God's Son. He says this in chapter 22 of Matthew, verse 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment of the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commands depend all the law and the prophets. Jesus has just summed up Deuteronomy. Everything in the law, the Torah, the books that we've studied for the past 5 weeks, Genesis through Deuteronomy, is all summed up in those two words. Our job, when we accept Christ into our lives, is to love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. That's what God's asked us to do. That's what His law is. And that's what the whole purpose of all those laws throughout those first 5 books, as hard as it was to get through some of them, hundreds and hundreds of laws, it's all summed up right there. Love God and love people. That's simple. And if we do that, then we are keeping our covenant. When I accept Christ into my life, I've made a covenant with Him to be His child and Him my God. My job, your job, is to love Him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. We're challenged daily to live the same challenge that Moses gave the people in Deuteronomy chapter 11. We have 2 mountains. God, not God. Whatever you want to put there. Evil, sin, the world, the earthly pleasures, whatever you want to say is on that mountain. Anything without God. Blessings and curses. Which are you going to choose? Which one are you going to follow? Which one will you accept? Eternity with Him or eternal damnation? Moses laid it bluntly on the feet of the people of Israel. It's your call. It's your choice. Choose wisely. Have a great week.